Agenda is motivating engagement through discussion feedback, motivating engagement through other assignment feedback and additional communications, avoiding demotivating feedback, and reducing the time needed to provide effective feedback, because we all know we're really busy. You will have the opportunity to practice some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about today in breakout rooms. And at the end, hopefully we'll have some time to take some Q&A and share some ideas. So let me start with a definition. Engagement is the active, thoughtful participation in a course, right? We don't want our students to just phone it in, or even worse yet, not be there at all. Feedback, what I'm talking about, is both positive and constructive feedback that acknowledges student participation or the lack thereof. Sometimes we forget the need for positive feedback. I know going to school, I mostly got the red marks on the paper, or a paper that had very few red marks and a high grade. It wasn't often that faculty took the time, or even teachers when we were younger, to say, hey, this is a very unique idea or a very different perspective on whatever, or this is a great use of adjectives, or what have you. So we want to make sure that we give people positive feedback, as well as the kind of feedback that can strengthen their work or enhance their understanding of what we're doing. So let's start with our first thing, motivating engagement through discussion feedback. First of all, when we often think of feedback as faculty or teachers, we think of feedback as what we put in a grade book or what we write on a piece of paper we're handing back to our students. But that's not the only way to provide feedback. In a discussion, whether it's online asynchronous, which is the primary focus of what I have here, or if it's on a Zoom, or if it's in a live classroom, you get feedback from your peers as well as whoever is teaching. So you want to create questions that provide the opportunity for motivating feedback and sharing of student experience. Let me offer you an example. If I were to say, describe or define separation of powers and checks and balances, and why are they important for democracy, everyone's going to have pretty much the same answer, assuming they understand the concepts. However, if I were to ask a question along the lines of, our democracy is set up with separation of powers and checks and balances. However, parliamentary democracies, such as the ones in England and Canada and Germany, don't have these structures in their government. What are the strengths of our system versus their system? What are the weaknesses of both systems? Which would you prefer? Now we can have a conversation. The students can still demonstrate their understanding of separation of powers and checks and balances and the role they play in democracy, which was the original question. But they can also have a conversation and debate among themselves about the merits of both systems, or some combined system like France, and be able to have something to communicate with others about. Requiring students to engage with the posts of others in a way that continues conversations. First of all, we got to require engagement. Most of my online asynchronous classes run on a week basis. I usually start them the new week the same day I end the old week, if I happen to have students who can only come in on a single day. So for example, here at Rutgers, I have a class that's running Wednesday to Wednesday. By Saturday night at 8 p.m., they've got to all post their initial introductory post. Whatever it is they're responding to, my initial question needs to be posted. They then have till Wednesday to post reactions to either anything I post in response to what my students have posted, or anything their peers have posted. This way, we're having a conversation. And of course, you include that as part of the grades, additional little outside motivation there. But what I find is that if the topics are interesting enough, the students are going to engage anyway. You want to motivate students by engaging with supportive statements, by using their names, by using positive language, and by asking questions. So let's go back to my example involving separation of powers and checks and balances. Let's say that the question asks things along the lines of, for current examples of checks and balances and stuff like that, as well as examples of the way the Constitution protects rights. The student is given an excellent answer about a current example of checks and balances. But instead of discussing how the Constitution protects rights, maybe they talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a great example of rights protecting. It's just not constitutional in terms of the Constitution doing it. So supportive language might be, John, you gave a great example of a law that protects rights. This question is particularly focused on how the Constitution protects rights, and then explain the difference between what the Constitution and the laws do, and then offer an opportunity to come back with a new example. This way, the student isn't simply being told, hey, you wrote the wrong thing, right? Nobody wants to be told they wrote the wrong thing or they did the wrong thing in front of all their peers or in front of everybody. That's why a lot of times people don't want to participate. They don't want to be called out. But being told, hey, you got a great example, you got the right idea, let's shift it a little bit, is more supportive in language. Using people's names, we like to hear our names. There's a psychology behind that. Again, positive language, right? So instead of saying this is weak because, here's a way to strengthen your answer. Asking questions. In that case, hey, can you give me a different example using the Constitution? But in general, asking questions to continue a discussion. So for example, in an ethics class, when we're doing utilitarian ethics, which looks at benefits and harms of stuff, what are some benefits that Joshua didn't think of? Or what are some benefits, or what is the likelihood of the harm that Lucille came up with? Those kinds of things would be examples. So here's an example question of my own. And I'll let you guys in your minds, or if you want to stick your answers in the chat, yes or no, that's up to you. Which one of these questions is going to provide more opportunity for feedback? And by what I mean here in feedback is engagement with people in the discussions. What is the spoils system? Who created it? How does it relate to civil service tests and civil service job protections? Or the second one, argue for or against removing civil service protection that make it, argue for or against removing civil service protections that make it difficult to fire government employees. Consider why the civil service system was created in the first place, as well as challenges and benefits job protections have created in modern times. In your replies to other posts, offer thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of arguments presented. I'm going to give you guys, you don't have to write in the chat, but if you want to, you're certainly welcome to share with other folks. But I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to actually think. I'm going to say most people thought the second question was better. What made it stronger? And I want to give you 30 seconds to think about that, and then I'll explain why.
You
got some ideas?
Yep.
Yep.
Rachel,
right. So I want to make an observation, guys. The first is it took you a couple of 10, 15 seconds to come up with ideas. The second is everybody waited for someone else to go first, right? That's typical human behavior. One of the ways to strengthen participation, whether it's online, in person, in a Zoom room, is to give people a chance to think of what they want to say. I do this in in-person classrooms with my students. It has two benefits. One, it forces everyone to actually engage and think about what's going on. Two, if you are the shy student, you're not comfortable speaking, I still can collect those papers at the end of it's an in-person class. I can see online what they're doing online and see if they are understanding what's going on. So let's take a quick look at what folks came up with here. More options for an answer, correct, right? So we can talk about more things. Yep, components of the first question are assumed to be answered in the second. Yeah, everything in the first question, except for the fact that President Jackson created the spoils system, you need to know for the second question. Formulate an argument and creating more dialogue, right? Because we're critiquing arguments. Those are all great points. The other benefit is it actually gives students a chance to practice critical thinking and argument skills. As somebody, I teach political science, law, and ethics mostly. I'm all about teaching people how to make effective arguments. So part of that's being able to recognize other people's effective arguments. So now we're going to get a little bit of practice. What's going to happen is you guys going to be put into breakout rooms in a couple of seconds. You can choose one of my dreadfully bad questions or a question that fits the kinds of things that you guys teach. And you're going to make it into a stronger question for a discussion question that's going to encourage feedback within the discussions. The other thing I want you to practice, if you remember from a couple of slides back where I said, in providing feedback to others, being supportive, using names. So when you're in the breakout rooms, use supportive language, use that kind of language as you consider what your fellow breakout room participants are suggesting. So shall we put them in breakout rooms for like 4 minutes? Excellent. So does anyone want to share in the chat either an edited version of one of my questions or one of your own questions from stuff that's closer to the subject matters you teach? Any brave souls? I'm going to offer a suggestion while I'm giving people a chance to type. Looking at my third one that says describe how utilitarian and deontological ethics work. The ethics classes are always great for discussions because you just invariably have stuff to talk about. But this is the great lifeboat example, right? You've got 4 people on a lifeboat. One happens to be the captain of the ship that went down. You got to decide who doesn't get to stay because the lifeboat can hold 3, and you have all sorts of details about the 4 people, right? And then you would say apply utilitarian ethics or apply deontological ethics and explain, the decision you made. So that's the kind of question where it's very easy. Utilitarian ethics will talk about the benefits and the harms and the degree and likelihood of keeping the various folks, and people can debate over, those benefits and harms and their degree and their likelihood and things that people didn't even think about. Hey, you left out this. What about that? The ontological ethics is a little more straightforward. Captain goes overboard. That's the rule. Anybody? Nobody? No takers? All right. I'm not going to force people to. So motivating engagement through other assignment feedback and additional communications. Generally, you want to use names. So in a lot of your learning management systems, there's a general comment box in addition to whatever other opportunities are for commenting on a particular assignment. So you can always start out by, saying, Felipe, I enjoyed reading your paper. Your point about Andrew Jackson's self-interested political behavior was a very good one. However, you do need to strengthen your understanding of certain grammatical structures in English. Remember, the school has a writing center. Here's a link to it. If it's an online kind of thing, if it's in person, it's located in choose whatever building it's located in, kind of thing, right? So what you're doing there is you're using the person's name. That's also an example of sandwiching. You're providing positive information first in terms of, the compliment about the comment about Andrew Jackson. Constructive feedback, again, it was fairly general because it's a general comment section. And again, some other positive kind of thing, at the end. Because again, psychologically, people get very demotivated, many people anyway, when all they hear is negative. You also want to provide detail. Saying, oh, that's great, or your paper's full of grammatical issues doesn't tell people what's great about it or what the grammar problem is, right? Is it subject-verb agreement? Is it noun-pronoun agreement? Is it, what is it that someone needs to look to figure? Is it commas all over the place, right? That aren't where they belong. So you want to be specific. Other kinds of communications, again, generally use names, except in texting, just because that's generally not what's done there. Acknowledge what a student is communicating. I'm sure we've all gotten that email or that phone call, those of us who are college level professors, where the student goes, oh, I had a fight with my boyfriend last night, so that's why my paper's late. And, I just didn't feel like doing it. I had a lousy day. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, that doesn't fit into the kind of things that I count as an emergency for handing in late papers. So how do you respond to that student? You want to acknowledge, even if you think their explanation is kind of like scratch your head. Hey, Sarah, I'm really sorry to hear that, you got in a fight last night. I'm sure that's, very unpleasant. I'm sure, as you realize, that doesn't constitute an emergency that prevented you from completing your assignment. As always, remember the late policy. You're more than welcome to submit the work within whatever your late policy is and whatever the penalty is. Acknowledging people sometimes is more important than necessarily giving them, that, not taking off the 5 points kind of thing. People want to feel heard. Write in positive language, right? Your paper can be strengthened by doing X, Y, Z instead of it is weak. That was, one of the things I learned teaching preschool swim lessons was, instead of telling the kids don't run, was to say use your walking feet. Because when you say don't run, all the kids hear is do run. They don't hear the not. So you want to try to present things in a positive way. I also want to point here that you really want to try to figure out what the challenges are that students are facing, and you really want to try to help them along. This is an example not from college. This is an example from my son, who is in middle school. They had this assignment where they had to watch a video of someone using paper to make a fidget spinner, and they had to use the paper to make the fidget spinner. And my son was complaining horribly about this assignment. He goes, "It's not working. I can't do this." And I'm like, well, email your teacher, tell the teacher what you're having difficulty with, and see what she has to say. And of course, he was like, "I don't want to do this. This is so annoying. This is so," and of course, I'm trying my best not to watch the video because I'm almost totally blind, and me watching videos to learn how to do something isn't exactly the most productive activity anyway. So he emails the teacher, and the teacher writes back, "Oh, be patient." And I thought to myself, well, that's not helpful, right? Because it's not addressing why my son's having difficulty. So I finally, he went and tried to get help from a classmate. That was an epic fail because the other boy couldn't do it either. So I finally said, okay, I will try to watch this video. And he turns it on, and I'm like, "You forgot to turn the sound on." "Oh, there is no sound. There is no verbal instructions." So I'm listening to this, looking at this video that's someone's hands, where's my camera? Someone's hands going like this. Really, and I'm going, okay, this is not helpful. There's no written instructions that I can either make large and read or have someone read to me. There's no verbal instructions. So here I am trying to visually watch a video. I keep stopping, and I finally had my son, there's a way to slow down videos on YouTube. I finally had him slow down the video on YouTube for me, and trying to figure out how to do this. Very frustrating, demotivating experience. I share this story both because you want to make sure you're giving useful feedback. And if you're not sure what the challenge the student is facing, ask. That teacher could have said, "How far are you getting before you're running into difficulty?" So that the teacher could have said, "Hey, slow down the video so you can watch what the person's hands are doing more slowly," right? Could have offered a suggestion for success. The other reason I offer that story is because we want to make sure that we're not presenting assignments in a way that are frustrating our learners because they have different learning styles or they have different learning needs. I would have absolutely hated that assignment if I were a student. I once actually took a video, a class that was all done by videos. It was a professional development at one of the schools I work at, not Rutgers, where they were showing us videos. And for somebody with my eyesight, it's very hard to follow how-to videos. I need written out instructions that I can, go more slowly and do. I don't process visual information fast enough to follow a video. And it was very frustrating, and it was very, very annoying. And then I had a faculty member, we had to create videos in this, and I looked kind of like this, my nose was sticking up, and they were criticizing, my video feed, and they were criticizing, "Oh, it's very dark." Well, I was in a basement at the time. I'm not now, but I was in a basement at the time where it was just what the lighting was, and I was like, I'm part-time faculty. This is what I have access to. So think about how we demotivate people based on not taking into consideration their specific realities as we write back to them, and one way to do this is to ask. It's to simply say, what are the challenges that you're facing? Why are you, what method are you using to approach the reading or to approach the assignment? Okay. Simple email. "Dear John, you're currently failing the class. You need to submit your missing work." Very short, very succinct, very to the point. Not very motivating. Unless somebody is so motivated that the fear of failing is going to get them to, "Oh my God, I got to get my work done. I don't want to get in trouble from mom, or I don't want to get thrown out of school." Or chances are those folks are probably on top of their grades and already know. So here's the alternate. "Dear John, I hope you're doing well," right? I'm acknowledging that maybe something's going on. Maybe he has COVID. Maybe one of his parents has COVID. Maybe he's working an extra job because his parent is out of work because of COVID, right? Our students don't always tell us what's going on. So I hope you are doing well. Because you have missed some assignments, your current average is not passing. Again, better than you're failing. The good news is that you can raise your average by completing the missing work. If you need clarification on assignments, time management tips, or other assistance in getting the work done, please ask. And again, the idea behind this is saying, I want to help you succeed. I acknowledge that there might be things standing, in your way. And again, not directing them at the student. You're not, as opposed to saying you're not doing your work, saying, hey, what's going on? What might be the challenges? What might be the issues? It might be a technical issue. The student doesn't know how to navigate technology or doesn't have access to a certain kind of technology. I had a student one time that was having technology issues and emailed me and said, I don't know what to do. And I emailed back and I said, Canvas has an app. And he goes, oh my God, I didn't know that, And that was the end of the problem. He was able to do his stuff on his smartphone. All right. So this is our practice again for those of you who want to go into the breakout rooms. Give you like 3 minutes. And again, the idea here is we're going to try to write a reply email to the student. I worked really hard on the paper and the grade you gave me is completely unfair. It should have at least gotten a C. By the way, I love these emails when you're getting them in response to a paper that was assigned in a writing class. Just saying. I purposely wrote this with the way some of our students will write their emails. So again, if we can put folks into breakout rooms for about 3 minutes and take that opportunity to try to write an email in response that uses this. I didn't give you a student's name here, so just make one up. That uses the student's name and tries to use positive language to respond to the student's concern about the grade received, as well as the fairness of it. And I'm going to try to encourage you guys to respond. Again, does anyone want to share in the chat what they came up with? I realized that some folks ended up in the breakout room before they saw the question. I told it to the one group and then couldn't get into the other breakout room. Anyone want to share? There's obviously more than one perfect answer to this question. Part of our, part of our instinct is to look at this and go, trying to make my screen larger so I can see the question. There we go. Part of this is to look at this and go, here we go. We have a student who's not only not writing in standard American English, but kind of writing in text language and complaining about, grades. And also, who thinks he or she worked really hard. And it's possible the person did. I always use the example of my husband swimming. He exerts a great amount of energy and goes nowhere. Kind of looks like the active drowning victim in the lifeguard videos. I, on the other hand, exert very minimal effort and can swim laps around him because I have a very good stroke. So the point here is, how do you respond to the student? So one way would be to say, again, whatever the name is, Isaiah, I appreciate that you worked really hard on your paper, and I certainly hear that you're frustrated and disappointed in your grade. I'm not exactly sure what methods you used when creating your pre-writing and how you reviewed your rough draft by, prior to creating your final draft. I'd be more than glad to, look at these elements of your writing, as well as if it was research, kind of what research stuff you did, to give you more specific feedback. If it's, if it's kind of more of a writing issue than anything else. A lot of times students who say they worked really hard didn't do any free writing or a rough draft, and they'll just kind of be like, oh, never mind. Other times they will show you they really did, and they really think they worked really hard, or they may have worked really hard, but they may have just been off base. And you work with them and they learn from the process. Sometimes it's because they simply don't understand. Going back to that utilitarian example, I had an assignment at one of the schools I worked at where they were asked to decide who got a heart based on utilitarian ethics. And somebody wrote this really nice paper using deontological ethics. And they had a very strict grading rubric in that school. And that person earned very few points because a huge part of this paper was demonstrating your understanding of utilitarian ethics. And they didn't do that because they didn't use that framework. And they were furious. How could you give me such a low grade? And they appealed to, powers that be that you appeal grades to. And, because they had worked so hard. So, sometimes it's really being clear and pointing that kind of stuff out. All right. Avoiding demotivating language. We have to remember that not everyone shares our lived experiences. And folks from different cultures, people with disabilities, non-traditional students, may have some very different experiences and very different expectations about what goes on in the classroom and what ought to go on in the classroom and how people ought to treat each other. I just randomly put a bunch of things on a slide that I could think of that created controversy at some point. Merry Christmas, right? If you live in a part of the country where everybody's Christian and everybody's celebrating Christmas, or you're from an older generation where everybody said Merry Christmas regardless of who they were talking to, you might be put off by the folks who are saying Happy Holidays, or the folks who are saying you shouldn't say Merry Christmas. On the other hand, if you are not Christian, or you live in a very diverse part of the country, or you're from a younger generation, you might think Happy Holidays, that's what we should be saying. Of course, not everybody even celebrates holidays in December. So maybe the answer is avoid it. Or if someone wishes you a particular greeting, respond with the same greeting. Or one of the things I tend to write is, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy New Year to those who are celebrating. To everybody else, have a great winter break. This way we're acknowledging that there's a diverse group of people in the room, and we're giving a place for everyone to fit. What's a biased? I took this one because it's the reverse of what you usually say. There are folks out there who will be like, oh yeah, whites are biased against blacks. I got news to you. We're all biased about something. It may not be the same thing. It may not be race, but everybody has our biases. It's the way the human psyche works. So some of us may be in a community college classroom and may be making assumptions about the quality of our students, even though some of our students may be there because it's economic, or the classes meet at a convenient time, or that's where the good culinary arts program is, right? So we really want to check our own biases and be aware of whatever they are. But we also want to make sure that we are choosing our language, choosing our questions and comments in ways that don't make other people feel unwelcomed. Because if you feel unwelcomed, you're not motivated to come. You're not motivated to participate. So we want to think about how we phrase things. Also the kind of language, like most of us here probably have masters or PhDs or some professional equivalent thereof. So we're used to big words and SAT words and all that kind of stuff. Our students aren't necessarily used to those words. So sometimes you can say the same thing without using, what we used to call 25-cent words when I was growing up. Think about language that's inclusive. Think about ways to be self-conscious, but also be aware of how other people may perceive things, even if you don't perceive them that way. His, her, and other pesky pronouns. So my mother was the grammar police, right? If I said the kid left their shoes on the floor, my mother would be like, no, it's his or her shoes, right? That's standard American English, single for single. Well, nowadays there are folks who, find gender-based pronouns to be uninclusive. So what do you do, particularly if you were raised in a house with the grammar police, or you're teaching standard American English for writing? You write in plural, if you can, right? So instead of if a person does this, or if a student does this, then he or she needs to, you write, if students do this, then they, right? So it's being just cognizantly aware. You don't have to buy into it. You don't have to care personally. It's respecting what other people care if you want them to feel welcome. Referring to different groups. This is a moving target. I really wish I could give you specific answers on it. When I was growing up, it was Black. Then it was African-American. Now it seems to be moving back towards Black, for example. I don't know what the right answer is. For people with disabilities, in this country, it's person first language. It's people with disabilities as opposed to disabled people. In England, the advocates for disability groups call themselves disabled people, in the same way that someone might call themselves an Italian-American. It's a descriptive adjective. So I think it's just being aware of your audience and being aware that people may react to language you used. And for those who can see, which is probably everyone in this session but me, watching people's body language as you communicate to see if they're reacting. Which brings us to the question of asynchronous communication challenges. If you're in an asynchronous environment, we don't have body language. We don't have tone of voice necessarily, unless you're in some of the classrooms where you have students posting videos, or you as a professor are posting videos to students. Remember that we don't have tones of voice. that might be a case where the emoji isn't an inappropriate thing to use in certain elements of the course, such as discussions, because it expresses feeling. Or you might need to make sure you're choosing words that describe feeling or describe a feeling directly, because sometimes asynchronous communication, you lose the ability of having tone of voice. You lose the ability of having somebody being able to express, you know, how they feel about something. These are the kind of soft things people don't realize their language is being demotivating. This is the old, when I was growing up, you put red marks all over somebody's paper kind of things. So it's thinking in that way. Excellent. So we have another practice opportunity. The following is an example of language regarding late submission to assignments. Again, this is thinking about how we kind of may demotivate people from different backgrounds. So this says all students are expected to submit all assignments in a timely fashion, right? Nothing wrong with setting your expectations and telling folks what the rules of the game are. Quite frankly, you should do that. If an assignment is late, a full letter grade will be deducted. I'm not asking whether or not you, for the purpose of this discussion, whether or not you actually agree with that late policy, and that actually isn't even my late policy in most of my classes, but that is a common late policy. And no assignment will be accepted that is more than 3 days late. There's no excuse for late work. So it's really the end of this that we're looking at this. There's no excuse for late work, kind of part of this the most. Because the reality is that many of our students may not be having the same experience in college that we are. As I said at the very introduction to this, I teach in all sorts of colleges. I have students that are older than me, who are, returning to school after they finished raising their children, or returning to school because the factory job they had was outsourced, or the job they had got replaced by automation or just became obsolete because of advanced technology. I have students that are in the military. I got an email one time from a student saying, we've just been put on high alert. I had another student who I'm pretty sure was on one of the Navy ships that had the COVID outbreak, and it was like, we're stuck in our rooms. I can't get to where the internet was, right? So obviously, that's a pretty legitimate reason for not being able to submit work. You have students that are parents or caring for parents. Somebody becomes ill. They're not the, I have no idea why my camera's doing that. They're not the typical, traditional college student who has no other responsibilities, maybe works a little bit to help support him or herself at work. But beyond that, and a lot of these students won't feel like, if this is your, you say no excuses for late work, they won't feel as if you're even willing to, it's very unmotivating once you fall behind. Oh my God, I can't pass. I'm behind, that kind of thing. So the challenge here is really to come up with a way of phrasing this that is a little more understanding of the fact, for those of you particularly that are teaching in schools that have this kind of non-traditional and diverse student bodies, that acknowledges the lived experience of the person who is helping, by working 30 hours a week to pay the rent, or who has a child or a younger sibling that they're helping, to take care of, or who is in the military serving the country. So we're almost out of time, and I do want to give folks a chance to actually, I have one more thing after this. So we're not going to actually go into the breakout room for this. But again, it's thinking about that. My actual late policies tend to be a 5-point deduction for submitting things late, almost always. And again, the exception to the point deduction is if you truly have an emergency that prevents you from physically doing the work. I will also admit that when COVID hit last semester in the spring, I kind of just gave up on late policies and just tried to help people get their work done. All right, reducing time needed to provide feedback. This is the big thing for all of us. Rubric usage makes this a lot easier, particularly if you're in like Blackboard or Canvas or whatever, because you can literally just put the numbers in for the specific rubric on an assignment with the template feedback already in the rubric. You might want to add some additional feedback that's directed towards specifically what a student wrote. So for example, if you give somebody, a proficient or a B or however you're labeling these things, instead of an A, you might want to say, well, you had some great points about X, Y, or Z. Your answer could have been strengthened by providing a little more detail in regards to the spoil system or whatever. Template usage. Not everybody is using rubrics for whatever reason. And sometimes templates also can come in handy. So for example, I have a general grading rubric for one of the papers I have in one of my schools. And it's like distinguished, you wrote great, it's kind of these generalizations about what constitutes distinguished and proficient and basic and all. But it doesn't really tell the student specifically anything related to what he or she wrote. So particularly when they have difficulty understanding a concept. So what I do with those is I have templates. So one of my papers asks how the rules related to voting, one of the sections of one of those papers has rules related to voting impact a particular public policy. I'm forever copying off of a template what the students have to do there. They have to look up a rule related to voting, like the requirement to have a photo ID, show it to vote. Who's impacted demographically, how that demographic group is likely to vote, and where that political party stands on the policy. And I break it down for them. I don't have to type that every single time I have to give that feedback. I just copy and paste it off of the template. So templates are really helpful, particularly where you have students making, similar mistakes because it's copy paste. In some of the rubrics, like in Canvas, you can actually have a comment library where you can literally just click in the rubric itself and just click and select the comment, and it puts it right in the box for you. Excellent. Peer feedback is allowing the students to give each other feedback. This is actually a wonderful thing, both in terms of saving you time, but also in terms of pedagogy, because it requires them to really think about what it is they're being asked to do. So if you're talking about, for example, evaluate an argument, right? You're teaching people to argue effectively. And you have a student give a feedback on another student's argument, they have to really break down that argument and be able to evaluate it. If you're talking about peer feedback in a writing class, I highly recommend giving very specific instructions. For example, what is the other student's thesis statement? What makes it strong? What can make it stronger? Because if you just say, provide general feedback, they're right. Oh, the essay was great. Or, oh, this essay needs improvement. Or maybe you should have a little bit more detail. The kind of things that we didn't like as feedback when we were students that were very general. So this is ways to really kind of get that feedback in, but get it quicker. What you'll find is the first time you create templates, it's going to take a longer amount of time. The more you teach the stuff, the more you have those templates developed and edited and updated, it takes less time to use them each time.